because I've got to fiddle with a few knobs here in order to make everything happen. So that needs to occur. I'm doing it now. So let's go. We're here. We're done. Okay, so we're live, everybody. Welcome to Brainfood Live on Air, episode 61. Would you believe it? We're rocking on 61 episodes for this for this show. I think we've done about 30 odd already this season. We've been keeping pace, so it's going really well. Anyway, super exciting today because and it's loads of reasons why. Not only have we got a fantastic lineup and a great topic, but once again, Adam Gordon has been upgraded by my good friend, Kat Robinson. Katharine, how are you doing? A long time no see, it seems.
Yeah. Well, I don't know when I actually last saw you in person, but yeah, long time no see.
Years ago in person, I think, because it was at one of your events that I attended. I believe it was some sort of sourcing event. And I actually came, I'm not sure whether I came in to give a talk or whatever, but one of those round table things that you used to do in London. Can't quite remember when that was, but at least 2 years ago, I would say.
Quite a while.
Yeah, a lifetime ago, considering events since then. Anyway, before we kick off the show, a couple of pointers. As always, we do AV check before the start of the show, because there's a good chance I don't know what I'm doing. So if you can hear me okay on the Crowdcast, just comment on the chat stream there. Say, yes, Hong, I can hear you. Same again for LinkedIn Live, actually. I should be live on LinkedIn, even though that's been massively truncated my reach. But if you're on LinkedIn and you can hear me, please just comment and say, yes, Hong, I can hear you fine. Is my mic on? Yes, it is. And I believe we're live on Periscope and Facebook as well. How exciting. So we're blasting it out everywhere. There's no escaping Brainfood Live. Anyway, quick shout out also to our sponsors this week. Our sponsors are Stack Overflow Talent. They hardly need introduction. If you are a person recruiting for technology staff, I think Stack Overflow are probably still the must-have sort of source for that type of talent. If you don't know them and you're recruiting for software engineers, you really should know them. And not only this, but they've actually come out with a really good report. They do this every year. Their annual developer survey is out. It will be featured on Recruiting Brainfood on Sunday. So I thoroughly recommend you check that out on the newsletter when it comes out. But I've shared it on the chat stream there on the Crowdcast because everyone should look at that basically. I think they've surveyed a couple of 100,000 developers, I think. This is in February, so just when COVID pandemic and all the rest of it started to rock in. But it's about what do developers want. So if you're interested in hiring devs, then this is definitely a document bookmark. Check it out. Okay, so Kat Robinson, let's get on with this. Firstly, for the few people who don't know who you are, can you introduce yourself quickly and what it is you do, Kat?
Yeah, I'm Katharine Robinson, and you probably will find me various places on the internet as the Sorceress. So that is from a time on the internet where we didn't use our real names. I'm that old. I'm that many years old. So yeah, when I first started in sourcing, most of the sources that I was finding online were based in the US, and a lot of them had these cool handles that they used online. So I wanted one, and I came up with the Sorceress, and I think more people know me as that than know me as Katharine.
That's so, right. Yeah. And you know what? You actually were the first Brit to win some sort of sourcing competition, weren't you? Was that right? I mean, tell us a story about this.
Oh yeah, many years ago. 10 years ago now, more than that actually. I was the first Brit to go to the States and win the SourceCon Grandmaster Saucer Challenge. So yeah, it's a bit of an online treasure hunt kind of thing, or that's the format that it took 10 years ago anyway.
The Brits represent, I don't believe a Brit has won it since, have they? You might be the one and only.
I think perhaps someone living in Britain has won since.
But they weren't British, yeah, that's right. Yeah. But, I think Europeans generally been doing great. I think there's a lot, if you take Europe as a group, I think generally been dominating SourceCon Grandmaster competitions. So shame on the American sourcing community. But the Brits, I don't think conspicuously better than anyone else. I think you led the way, and kind of no one else was able to step in your shoes, Kat.
Well, happy to step back and let everyone else come through, and I now feel thoroughly exceeded in all things.
No, well, you know what? You'll always have a place in the firmament, because you're one of the very first people in the UK, I would say, to operate as a sourcer, very distinct from being a recruiter, and also one of the first people to do training as well, I believe, one of the first people to get online as well. So you did a lot of this pioneering stuff. And I think the people who, some of the older heads that are watching this, and when I say older, I mean who were into this 5-6 years ago or whatever, they're not going to forget who Katharine Robinson is, even though these days, your interests have kind of diversified, let's say, into different things. Anyway, let's get on with it. Recruiting Brainfood. We always start off like this. It's a newsletter. I send it out every Sunday. Typically, the host has to have read it, and we need to talk about it. So what was interesting in the newsletter? I hope you've read it, Kat.
Yeah. So I always get the newsletter, and I kind of Control F sourcing to see which ones I should look at first.
Right.
But so, it was lovely to see tools like Million Short and stuff getting a shout out. That's a really cool tool that I often forget is there. And it's so important. But actually, my second look through, not looking for the sourcing things first, I loved 17 tips for great copywriting.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is something that we all do, whether you're, no matter where you are in recruitment, we all have to write things to persuade people of different stuff. And some good concise tips is really helpful. And that list, I just kind of devoured it. It was so well written in itself. That,
you know what? It's when you're writing a blog about marketing copy, your copy had better be good. Like there can be no higher pressure publication than that. But you know what? These guys are really hit the nail on the head. I mean, when I saw it, it says, okay, 17 marketing. They even advertised it as, look, this is internet gold. You need to watch this, read this. And whenever you're kind of bigging it up like this, you always think, oh my goodness, it better hit the mark. But you know what? As soon as I started clicking through that, I thought, you know what? These people have really delivered on the promise. And I swear to you, you need to read this post if you haven't done so already. I've shared it in the chat stream on Crowdcast there. 17 tips on how to write great copy. Everything they say is true. Oh my goodness. Read that and you'll get better tomorrow about writing emails, writing job ads, doing whatever it takes with the written word. You would get better. Anyway, cool. And Million Short, by the way, I've just shared that in the chat stream as well. Quickly, Kat, what is this thing? Did I describe it well? But you could probably describe it better than me, actually, in terms of what this tool actually is.
Yeah, so when we search a tool like Google, I mean, Million Short is just another search engine. But when we search Google, the terms that we usually put in, 1, 2, 3 words, a question, whatever, usually those things can be answered by Google's primary index. So that's just all the stuff that Google considers best. And it kind of sits at like a top layer of Google, essentially. And Google never really digs deeper down through its database of all that content it's got for you. So when we're writing more complex queries, looking for more obscure content, which often that's what we're looking for as sources. We want to find that person's resume, or a page which has their contact details on it, or just an article on an obscure publication. It might not be something that Google considers a really high ranked web page, but it's what we want. So if we want to get rid of all that stuff that Google considers best, which might be things like job boards, Wikipedia, the big news outlets, all that kind of stuff, it's not a small amount of stuff by any means, then Million Short can help, because it gets rid of all the most popular websites. So, you don't have to worry about seeing, the usual suspects coming up in your search results.
And that is actually genius, because when you think about it, it's the reverse of what Google thinks we want. Google is just going to service you the most popular things, but as recruiters, as sources, that's almost useless to you, because you're looking for those people that are hard to find. You wouldn't be doing anything on Google unless they were hard to find. you'd bang an ad out and in comes the candidates. You're on doing the sourcing because this is really hard to find. But Google has obviously going to deliver, if you like, from the primary index. I mean, a quick explainer for the crowd there what the primary index is, Kat, if you could.
I think it's all the content Google considers best. So it'll be from high ranked web pages, essentially. So yeah, it's the stuff that, if you search for insurance, it's going to be all the biggest insurance providers, are going to be in there because they've got well-built SEO websites, that kind of thing.
This is
so
it.
for most people's queries, most ordinary citizens, Google is built to find the correct answer to your query. So you're just looking for one answer, and Google is really good at that. But when you're sourcing and you're looking for many answers to one question, Google is perhaps less good because it just wants to bring you the best thing rather than all the things.
This is sourcing gold, and in fact, David has just mentioned exactly the same thing. It's a really important concept to have to manage, which is Google optimizes to deliver a single result. So the most average user is someone who's got, and by the way, that's often us in a different hat, right? If we're searching for something that we're not recruiting related, we are looking for one result, typically the optimal one. But as sources, we're looking for multiple results, typically lots of people that may or may not be viable for our job. Or even if let's say you're doing some sales or business development or prospecting or whatever, you're probably looking for more than one result. So Google needs to be manipulated in order to do that. And what this tool does, Million Short does, is basically help you with it by making sure it searches primarily the non-popular pages for Google. And very simply, you can simply do a drop down to say not the first 100 or not the first 1,000, not the first 10,000, and you can go deeper into the web to pick out stuff that no one else is going to find. So great idea. Go ahead and use it. It's got to have some recruitment value there. Okay, one more, Kat. What else was interesting for you?
I also enjoyed the post about the finding layoff lists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's something I haven't thought too much about. I'm not actively sourcing on live roles right now, so it hadn't been too much on my radar, but it was a really interesting read. I really liked all the different approaches, kind of the big breakdown of lists at the end. Just a super helpful resource, I think, for anyone who is actively hiring right now, to make the most of.
Yeah, and that's by our friend Jonathan Kidder, who has been on the show before. He's an excellent person in the industry. Not only is he an active recruiter, so a practitioner, what he does, but he also is a person that publishes a hell of a lot. So his blog, wizardsourcer.com, definitely, if you're into this type of content, you should check that blog out. He's constantly producing interesting stuff. And it's usually practical stuff as well. So if you're looking for things that you can kind of pick up and use tomorrow and get better at your job, then get on with that. In this particular post, it was all about all of these talent directories that these big tech companies were publishing, essentially, which I think is a great gesture by these companies who are letting staff go, but they're putting them onto searchable databases and saying, hey, check it out. Basically an evolution on a Google spreadsheet that other companies have been doing, just a bit more sophisticated, but they're doing what they can to help the staff that have been made redundant. Recruiters, if you're recruiting for people, you're still hiring for people, make use of these resources. These people are giving their information for free to you. And Jonathan has collected all of this together in one place for us to review. Okay, good stuff. Excellent. Moving on, Katharine, moving on. Let's talk about the topic at hand. We're going to get David Gallion, our friend David, on in a second. But let me ask you sort of the topic at hand before we bring David on. This is particularly about how do we level up a sourcer? So in other words, how do we improve a person's competence and skill at this activity? You've been a trainer before. And I'd be interested to know your perspective before we brought David into it and heard from him.
I think most helpful thing for me over the years has been working with organizations and with managers and things that understand, giving permission to spend time. That's been the most valuable thing for me, having a manager who understands, Katharine might try something and it might not work. So I'm going to have to be patient and kind of realize that, well, okay, the next thing she tries might work. So I think understanding sourcing and the fact that there is no one perfect recipe, you can't say, do these 10 things and you will win at sourcing. That's very difficult. Every role is different. Every group of skills is different. Every different industry is going to have different things that works. And I think the best thing for my learning has been, having that permission to spend some time and to fail, to kind of try new tools, press buttons, break things, and not feel like, that somebody views me as wasting my time.
You know what? That's a really important point, because I think a lot of recruiters out there maybe struggle to get into sourcing for precisely that point, where they're always looking for that turnkey, just deliver their candidates. Of course, everyone wants that. But those things typically cost money, or if you can turn the key, other people can turn the key. Therefore, it dilutes the point, in the sense that this candidate has been completely hammered already by loads of other recruiters. A big part of why sourcing is important is because it might get you to the people that no one else can find, and you might then find you've got a very different conversation to have with that person, because they don't have to they haven't been batting away recruiters for the past several days and hours and what have you. So creating the space for people to investigate, I think, is a critical point. But let's bring David on. Let's see what he's got to say about it. I've been keen to get David onto the show for a long time. I know he watches it as well. He's a great supporter of Brainfood Live. But he's also someone who's really pushed forward with his training business. And I want to see what the state of the industry is as far as he is concerned, in tech sourcing. So, David, I've just invited you on screen. You should get a pop-up. Hopefully we can get you on in due course. Well, Katharine, while Dave's getting on, I forget sort of where you're at these days. What are you doing work-wise these days?
Yeah, so most of the training that I do at the moment is through the Recruiting Gym. So it's a website that I'm working on with several other recruiting trainers.
Yep.
At the moment, we're primarily focused on agency recruiters, but that may well change further down the line. So yeah, we've got coaches in the gym focusing on all sorts of different areas. We've got leadership and management, mental health, business development. I'm sourcing coach. There's we're trying to build content and get courses out there and rolling. So making it a little kind of membership website where you can add on the things that you want, should you choose to spend some money.
Yeah, so it's a bit like a pick and mix type of stuff. You go in there, and if you need support in one area or the other, you can go and just simply select it, and have that consumer experience of the training. It's that's really fascinating, because I don't know too much about the business, but it strikes me that it's a very much a kind of a model that we're going to see more of in the future. Where you see, if you like, collaborations, or communal type of co-ops, even, of people, of experts setting up together, sharing the cost of the marketing, sharing the cost of the back end of facilities or whatever it is, but individually delivering their units or their modules to the things. I think we've seen this in development and agency world for a little while, design agencies and stuff like that, where oftentimes a big complement of the business has been individuals that have kind of come in and out, deliver their bit, but they may still operate under a singular brand to help with the brand building and to help with the acquisition of the customers and stuff like that. So I do wonder whether this model will become more prevalent as time goes on. I don't know whether you've thought about it in this way, Katharine, or whether you've seen anything to indicate that may be the case. What are your thoughts there?
I suppose I can only really report how it's working for me, and I suppose it's allowing me to still I guess, develop the training aspect of my business, but it gives me more time to also still do some sourcing as well. And there's kind of enough other people working on Recruiting Gym that, the buzz is maintained, the marketing workload is shared. So yeah, I mean, it's working well for me. And that's pretty much all I can report, I think, so far. But yeah.
Well, it's a fascinating experiment. I'll be interested for the viewers here who are kind of thinking about it, or maybe thinking about it, because I think all of us have been a bit destabilized on some of the traditional options that have been available to us. Permanent employment, or do you contract and kind of be permanent, but we're still sort of operating under the aegis, if you like, of a big employer. What are your thoughts and ideas about working in a cooperative, let's say? Where you can kind of partner up with people that have complementary skills, and maybe start trading together and doing the groundwork, the same kind of groundwork. If you're addressing, for instance, the same audience, it makes sense to partner up, because why would you want to double up the contact of that person? I can imagine, for instance, you've got a sourcer may partner up very well with, let's say a copywriter. Why not? So one person can support a business finding the individual. Another could help with messaging that person. Presumably you're selling to the same audience, meaning your customers are the same person. They would just traditionally have to go to two suppliers, but instead here, they may get more sort of their needs met with a single point of contact, which again seems to me to make sense. So, I'd be interested in whether anybody else has got any experience or thoughts along those lines. I think it's something we need to explore.
I mean, it's definitely appealed to me.
The sound on you's gone a bit weird, I think. Or is it just me? Can you repeat, Kat? Sorry. Okay.
My microphone helps my sound.
Okay, it might just be me. It's fine. Okay, go ahead, Katharine. Sorry. Oh, I've got rid of her. Oh. Are you there? That's fine.
Am I back?
Yeah, and you sound perfectly good, actually. So even better than before. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, yeah, sometimes this happens and I have to switch my microphone over, and then I no longer sound like a Dalek.
Yeah, I mean, it basically says it sounds weird, but now you're back, so it sounds all good, which is fine. That's good stuff. I'm David. I've just invited you again. I wonder whether there's a problem there with you coming on screen, but I've just invited you to check for a prompt. It should just be popping up on screen somewhere. Hey, if we're getting technical problems, we can still continue our chat. Okay, let's talk about training, Katharine, because what kind of people typically come into the gym? I mean, I'm imagining the gym metaphor now. So did you get like the slobs turning up? Actually, let me take that back. Do you get the people that are not used to, physical exercise turning up? Meaning, do you get like real newbies coming up to learn about sourcing really from a blank slate point of view? Or do you get individuals that kind of know what they're doing, they just need to top up and what have you? So what's your experience with that, Kat?
It's been a real cross section. We're kind of getting recruitment business owners coming in, who want to find out, what should my team know, that kind of thing. We're getting, people coming in who perhaps have just joined a company and, they've given them access to the Recruiting Gym as sort of part of their onboarding and training. So yeah, people who've never really, had much experience of sourcing. So that's been a bit of a challenge for me in that, you pick a topic. I do a webinar every week and I pick a topic and you have to pitch it so that there's, a bit of explanation for the person who's perhaps never even thought about this before. But there's something at the end for a person who, has been doing this for years to maybe go, okay, that's made me think. So yeah, training's always a challenge from that point of view. You really don't want to bore someone who has seen this before, and also you don't want to confuse anyone that has just it hasn't even heard the word Boolean before. So
that's the classic teaching problem, isn't it? You know, when we have this where you have streams of kids and you think, is it really good to have someone who's a fast, in a fast stream and someone who's in the slow and by the way, folks, Hung Lee was in like the remedial class when I was a young kid, so I was in the slowest of slow streams. I was actually in a different room with the real problem children there, so I understand what it's like to be really behind. But at the same time, it's like, is that the right thing to do? There's an ethical problem in the schooling context, but in the training, but you can understand why it makes sense when you're training, because it means that you have to kind of slow it down so it covers all of the people, but then that takes the risk that it might frustrate someone who then thinks, oh, well, why am I paying for this? I already know this stuff. I mean, is there a way you can stream it out, or do you have to kind of create more generic type of content for that audience?
I think sometimes it's really worth trying to be as upfront as possible with what you're actually going to give. I think, coming back to that article earlier of, 17 copywriting tips, one of the things that was in there was, honesty goes a long way. And the adverts for the Beetle, the really tall guy trying to get in a Volkswagen Beetle, and it just obviously wasn't going to work. So, yeah, I think just trying to be honest. And if it really is a webinar about Boolean basics, then say so. This is the building blocks of what we do as sources. And, Katharine's going to take you through what and or and not means. That way, somebody who already is very familiar with that will just go, you know what, that's not for me. I'm going to move on to the next thing.
Yeah. That's right. So they've got to check out, basically. In other words, the information up front will really help with that. Oh, David, you're here, which I'm pleased to see. Good to see you, sir. And actually, it looks like a very solid connection as well. So, David Galley, welcome to the show, man.
Oh, thanks. Sorry about the delay there. Third or fourth time was the charm. I tried multiple Chromes and Brave and Firefox worked. So
Firefox worked. Oh my God, that's I tell you what it is. It's all the crazy Chrome configurations and extensions you've got in there, David.
It absolutely is that. Yes.
I had to click all mine off.
Yeah. Well, David,
tried that too.
Before we kick off any further, just quickly for the people who don't know you, can you just describe who it is that you are and what do you do?
I hate that question. Why don't you do that? That makes it no. So I do like all kinds of stuff, but I source and I research, and I research about sourcing, and I teach people how to source. Would be the fastest I can say that. It's I don't know. I wish there was a version of that pithy copywriting for talking, because, well, I think I have a book on it over here, but I haven't read it yet. It's been challenging.
I think you were very succinct, and actually, that's exactly what it is you do. You're an educator as well as a practitioner in the field, which I think keeps everything sharp and relevant. And actually, we had a debate in the Facebook group recently, in the Recruiting Brainfood Facebook group, which, by the way, everyone's welcome to join, where we debated the issue was, is it right for a trainer to not have previously been a practitioner? Because apparently we're seeing some of that stuff going on, and there was like toing and froing, and generally speaking, the audience kind of felt that no, they shouldn't. But I was on the view of, sometimes it's okay. You don't need to necessarily have done it to be able to teach it. It depends on the level, let's say. I don't know.
I'd actually, take that middle road approach, just to be boring, right? More extreme views are more engaging, right? That's what the article said. No, it's two totally different skills, right? So right. I'd like to think I'm a pretty good sourcer. Maybe I'm an okay trainer, right? I like to think I've gotten better at it over the years, but I didn't go to school for training. I didn't go to school for sourcing either, but I've been doing training less long than sourcing, and very different skill sets. I don't know. I like it. It's kind of like that court scene, the end of My Cousin Vinny. I don't know if you've seen it, but like my mother was a teacher. My father was a teacher. 3 uncles on my mother's side were teachers, So I don't know. That's where I get my only education in teaching from.
But you know what? You're absolutely right. This is why I had a little bit of a problem with. I mean, there was another reason why we had a problem with that particular post. But the issue seemed to be, yes, you needed to have done the job in order to teach it. But there's a lot of evidence to say that isn't the case. And also, as you say, the two skill sets are unrelated. So it's not specifically the case that if you're good at one thing, you're going to be able to teach people how to do it. Oftentimes, that's not the case because you have some natural affinity for this thing, but you don't know how you got there. Like a naturally talented painter, not necessarily a good art teacher, right? He doesn't know why he's good.
Thanks, Lee.
Yeah.
Better than I would rate myself some days. No.
It's just okay. Well, Lee himself is an extraordinary commentator. He's actually very good on chat stream. But anyway,
I've seen.
So talking about this, let's have a review of what the state of the industry is as far as sourcing is concerned, David. Where do you see it? You're training regularly. This is a big part of the work you do. I mean, do you see the industry elevating in any way, or you kind of still having to teach the basics at this point, which is no bad thing, by the way. But how do you feel about the general literacy that recruiters have in this particular subdiscipline?
Well, I think, awareness has, at least of the fact that sourcing exists, has definitely increased over the past 12 years or so. Obviously, the activities that roll up under sourcing now are probably were understood as a potentially separable function even earlier than like 2007, 2008. But I think that is really when the terminology and the awareness and the attempt to create a community around sourcing kicked off, at least as far as I'm aware. I'm also not a trained historian, but my own recollection of the time is that, with not just SourceCon, but some of the other talking that was going around that original event, that's really where we had this breakthrough in awareness, right? And in 12, 13 years, I don't think the state of the art has advanced an inch, but I think the awareness of and the acceptance of the fact that it isn't going away has improved. So that's good. I see progress. It's slow, but it's good. There's a lot of reasons for that, and part of it is that our industry generally, like the turnover rates in talent acquisition are ridiculous. Like you're either in it for life or you're out in 6 months or a year or two. And so you always have new people, right? And you rarely get that concentration of skilled talent. And it's probably more true for sourcing. And that is in large part because there's no jobs for sourcers. There's very few jobs for sourcing managers. There's no career progression. Industry-wide, right? There are some companies, right? There are a few. They get invited to present at all the events because there's like 3 of them. And then they give the same story each time, right? I love the stories and I have no problem hearing them every time, by the way. Not a critique. Just wish there were more out there. So as a result of that, people get out. They move into other roles, go back into full cycle recruiting where there's more opportunity. And as an independent person, honestly, probably more money on average than full-time research. Or they, go into more general talent leadership roles, or they just bounce out into broader research roles, or they find that, wow, I can apply all these skills to literally every other type of research in the world, and I can have more fun because I can also apply this to a personal passion of mine, whether that's genealogy, or whether that's legal research, or whether that's OSINT, or private investigations. There's a lot of things you can apply these skill sets to. Online research is the core of sourcing. Sourcing, I think, is primarily a research function. And if you're a really good researcher, there's a lot of things you could do. And I don't think, and I think, you were talking about that earlier too, is that there's not that appreciation for research, right? As that key component. And as a result of that, it's not, incentivized, and it's not rewarded, certainly not at the highest levels. You don't have a VP sourcing.
No. And actually, Erin, thank you so much for your contribution there, Erin. She's absolutely right. Sourcing manager, I don't think they're ever, I don't know any sourcing manager. I'm sure they exist, but I would imagine that's a very small number of people on the planet would actually call themselves head of that particular function. Maybe Martin Lee held that job, didn't he, at one point, when he was doing some training, managing the people he trained at some sort of search firm. but it has to be a massive shared service you would anticipate to be able to do that. You wouldn't.
Yeah.
You would never get to that size where that would happen. So perhaps
Kelly, Randstad both have units.
Right.
Randstad rather famously, I think, and there are corporates that have set up like sourcing centers. I feel like Red Hat got invited to a bunch of events to present on theirs, and there's a few other companies that have done similarly. I always forget who Mark Lundgren used to work for or had been working for, but he did a lot of work there to promote that function.
Mark's book for everybody.
More recently, right? Where was he?
I love you, Mark. We'll get you on the show soon.
Wherever, the last one. See, I forget. He's been at too many, but yeah. So there's a few, but not a lot. And like, if you look at how many, you always think there's like, if you try to name the companies in an industry, you could think of 3 or 5, but there's hundreds, maybe thousands, tens of thousands, and maybe there's 5 that have them. Maybe there's 10, but there's not jobs for thousands of people. And there's like a couple million recruiters in the world, So.
Yep. I think that's right. I think it is 2 million, right? Your confederate Irina has researched that, at least on LinkedIn, hasn't she? Where she's just tracked down the absolute numbers of people that call themselves recruiters or TA or whatnot, and at least from an English language point of view, there was around about 2 million people. So that is probably describing full cycle folks, and then sourcing is a microcosm of that. It's like a very, very small percentage of people that would specialize purely on it. And as you say, maybe that's the reason where there simply isn't the space to be staying in that.
So most of who I work with, getting back to your question, I'm the tangent guy. So I'll take any conversation off topic. So coming back to your question, I work mostly with recruiters, right? Because there's not a lot of sourcing teams out there, and so I work mostly with recruiters, and a lot of folks want to bring make the recruiters more self sufficient, which is good. And I think we just commented on this in the chat too. You need to be, a lot of the skills that make a good sourcer also go into being a successful full desk recruiter if you're in a model or a workflow setup that there's no support, where there's like, obviously you can have division of labor and you can have specialization. And I think those models are good. Like the stalker talker split is kind of like, I think it was like the first model anyone came up with. And I think it's still the best idea, but like no one does it very well, unfortunately.
Because explain that to me. Stalker talker. So this is someone who finds the other person, makes the call, right? Or
yeah, exactly. Like that's the basic idea of split workflows in sourcing recruiting within a talent function, right? Like that was the first thing anyone thought of when we started talking about sourcing as a role 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's been very rarely implemented, and in those cases I don't know how successfully, but I mean it can work. You just have to have buy-in, you have to have focus. I mean it's all about how you structure your business. Now most recruiters are probably agency. I'd say by weight there's more agency recruiters than there are corporate recruiters in the world, but by a margin. Mm-hmm. And most agency recruiters, it's a revenue generating function. And as a revenue generating function, right, you tend to need to own more of the function because you want to not share your commissions, and like you don't want to have expense under your department. So
well, you know what? It's a very interesting point you made, because not only do agencies make the vast majority of people doing the activity of recruiting still, but we all kind of emerge from that. Like there's a genealogy in our career paths. We all track back to being agency recruiters. I think vast majority of in-house and sourcing people do have come from there, I would say. And maybe there's a legacy there where the sourcing role was always a junior admin candidate finding low prestige role. Whereas the high prestige role in agency world is the guy who goes in and brings the big customer in, or I just want this huge contract, and that's the person you try to shoot for if you're moving your career forward.
Wasn't one of the early ATS solutions for agencies called Big Biller? I mean, that's the culture, right? I mean, like that's where this comes from.
Literally, that brand works in agency land. Where Big Biller is our software.
Yeah.
buying that.
That's great marketing, by the way. I mean, good idea, certainly. Then,
Yeah.
terrible software, though, in my experience.
Right. So anyway, so we're in a situation where there's a legacy we're dealing with. There's also sort of a constraint in terms of the absolute number of roles. We've got a very interesting question from Georgina here, who I want to deal with now. By the way, folks, if anybody's got any questions for David or Katharine, please ask them in the Ask a Question section at the bottom of the screen. That's where we're going to get to it. So Georgina's just asked the question, in the post-COVID world, with so many good candidates now on the marketplace, will there still be a need for sources, resources? Thoughts on that? Katharine, let's go to you first, if I can.
Yeah, go for it.
I think yes. I mean, it just moves you slightly from, that very network-driven, candidate-centric market. I think, there becomes more parity maybe in supply and demand. And, when there's parity in supply and demand, people can make money. So I suppose it's about using those skills as a sourcer, not just to find, but to organize and be ready to actually, know who in your market is available, have their contact details, have an established relationship with them so that, when a role becomes live, you can immediately, join those two things together. Or you've got some people that you can reach out to and say, hey, who do you know? I think there's still going to be a need for those skills. So, yeah, if you've got those, you can win.
Go, David.
Oh, I was going to say that, I mean, there's, it so depends on your market too. Even like right now in the midst of all this, there are so many people not only not out of work, but in higher demand than ever. And anybody working in any function that supports, say, a video streaming or content streaming service, for example. People who do any kind of consulting with government, specifically around government financial systems, which have all fallen apart under the weight of unemployment claims, at least here in the US. Anyone who does, any kind of like essential services, right? All the jobs that weren't laid off. Anyone in the food supply chain, for example, is desperately in demand. The healthcare system massively in demand, more so than ever. So, yeah, I mean, maybe there's not a big sourcing need for people to work the counter at ice cream shops right now, but I mean, I think it's those people. right, exactly. So I mean, it's going to be definitely sector dependent, but that's true of any cyclical market change or any crazy event like this. It affects some people, like. Carnival Cruise Line isn't hiring right now, but Amazon sure is. So there's like all kinds of different things to consider when you ask a question like that. You got to take that kind of broader picture view. So just to reiterate what Katharine said, definitely like 100%.
I would concur with you guys, actually. So I appreciate the answer. Thank you for the question, Georgina. I think just to add a caveat to that, one of the good things about sourcing is it should be sector dependent. And this is the way in which I think it is different from the full cycle recruiter, who may invest more time in building a network in a specific sector, because they've got to deal with the candidates, the clients, the hiring managers, and all the rest of it, and build all of this really deep knowledge. But at the same time, a technical sourcer, as in someone who technically knows how to find people, potentially that's a very portable role to different industries. In fact, that seems to be my experience when I'm interacting with folks like yourself and other people who call themselves sourcers, is that half the time you're working on something else that's totally weird. It's not necessarily, I'm hiring for software developers. It's hiring for other folks that you've been brought in because you're an expert finder of people, rather than someone who necessarily has deep network knowledge in a specific sector. So I would say, to answer the final on Georgina, the demand for acquiring candidates overall as a global context probably has declined somewhat, given the fact there's more candidates available. But I think conversely, sources being sector independent it should mean that it's a very smart thing to still learn and develop skills in, because it might make it easier for you to be jockeying the trends and figuring out which places are going to be growing and which ones aren't. Okay, a couple of more questions for you two, particularly about where you think sourcing might be going. In terms of the training you've been delivering, the demands that you've been getting from the group, have you seen any trends that are worth monitoring, or is it more or less still the same stuff in the sense that, hey, I need to learn Boolean a bit more? Are there any different types of sourcing techniques that seem to be higher in demand from you've seen? David, let's go with you for this one.
Yeah. I mean, so there's a huge pushback, actually, and that's actually somewhat, I think, driven by some of the tool makers in the industry who actually compete directly with the training people. So all you software vendors out there, love you guys, but stop saying that there's no need for me.
Explain what you mean by this, David. So you're saying that vendors are providing turnkey solutions to say, hey, forget this will just give you candidates.
Their marketing is, you don't need to know how to do it, our tool does it for you. That's the whole idea. And okay, that'd be great if it were true. But I mean, tools are things you use to enable you, right? They are things that people use to make them better at what they're trying to do. They're not, generally speaking, things that ultimately replace people. And so the people using the tools still need to know what they're doing. Calculator doesn't teach you how to do math. Hammer doesn't teach you how to be a carpenter. Sourcing tools don't teach you how to source. And you got to know what you're looking for. If you don't give the right inputs to a software, it's going to produce garbage. And So anyway, but there's a general pushback. Just to get back to your question, there's a pushback against Boolean. It's like, I know Boolean. Boolean seems like a waste. But there is a big demand or desire for getting people out of their existing traps. Like, people get trapped in one resource, right? LinkedIn is a big one, but it's not just LinkedIn. Job boards, internal ATS systems, all good resources, but not the only resources. And a lot of times you run into, especially, in somewhat specialized roles where people are recruiting for the same folks over and over and over again. They feel like they've exhausted their existing network or market, and they need to expand and find more options and get out there and see more things. And so that is something we're starting to see more awareness of the need for. The problem is that once they realize what actually goes into doing that, they run screaming into the night. They're like, oh, wait a minute. Like, you mean I can't just put in years of experience on Google and find people filtered neatly by that criterion? Oh, well, no, thank you then. We thought this was a good idea, but it's too much effort. I'm going to go buy a piece of software now. So that's sort of been the challenge, I think in the last 5 years that I've seen.
That's really interesting, because there are a lot of great tools out there. And in fact, if you look at some of the innovations, particularly, things that are able, I mean, there's a lot of aggregating type tools that have always been around, but they're getting more sophisticated as we go. They seem to be very widely used as well, very popular pieces of software. But it seems to me it's actually sources using a lot of those software as well. It's not like they haven't really broken into the mainstream per se, because when you're speaking to, and I hate to use the term average recruiter, but when you're speaking to somebody who's just doing his job and not necessarily glued to webinars and going to conferences and sucking in this kind of leading edge knowledge, that they don't know some of the stuff. There's some of the tools that you mentioned. They're all pretty small players. They're all like 5-10 man type organizations doing their bit. And they're still selling to the people that they think they're going to disintermediate.
Yeah, so a lot of people talk about tools, and I have to say, I still rely very heavily, and it's not because I'm old or out of touch. It's just because they do what I need them to do, and they do them well. I still work primarily out of Outlook, Excel, and one browser tab for Google. Those are my top 3 sourcing tools and business tools today. I use a lot of Chrome extensions, but that's really my big 3. So whenever we have conversations about the hot new tools, it's sorry, Microsoft and Google beat you to the punch. Just there's nothing better. It's actually interesting from a getting it perspective, and I don't necessarily love the tool for my use cases always, but The person I talked to who seemed to have the most like awareness or getting it, and again, I haven't had this conversation with people running all the tools, but the fellow whose name I forget behind Zap Info, I think it's called now. They went through a name change a while back.
Yep.
What he said and what put it in perspective for me is that his goal isn't to provide a sourcing tool. His goal is to provide or to reduce essentially remove data entry or like copy pasting tasks from the workflow. So like click here and port this information here and tell it how to do it, and it'll do it. I mean, I don't know if it always works, but the idea or the fact that he gets that is like really key. And I think a lot of tools want to move you into their ecosystem rather than integrate into yours. It's always interesting how this works, right?
Yeah,
but I mean,
that in itself is probably the key challenge from a vendor side. Having worked vendor side, I totally get it. Like if you try and pull people out of the workflow, that's where it's going to grind to a halt. You're not going to do it with enough people for you to be a success. It sounds like your friend at ZapInfo understands that, and what he's doing is basically making recruiters more efficient.
Everybody, it's like I think branding that as a sourcing tool would be a terrible idea, and I don't think he's done so.
That's right. Is it Jasquith or what his name is? I think that's the guy.
Not a close friend, right? Because I don't remember his name, but I did talk to him once on the phone, and like we've traded emails once or twice.
Let me just share a link to him in the chat stream. So if anybody needs to connect to Eric, go ahead and do that. Okay, Kat, let's go to you. In terms of what you've seen, in terms of people coming at you with your training demands, has there been any kind of change of how it looks? Or is it generally the same stuff? Like, this is what people are looking for. This is what they need. It's like selling burgers. They want a burger. Give them a burger.
Yeah, I think the only thing I really feel that's changed is there's an air of, people are coming to me and saying, I want to make sure I'm getting the most for the money I'm spending. Whereas before it was just, what can I do for free? Whereas now there's almost so when I first started training, it was like, this is all free, right? Whereas now it's more, well, I'm spending money on LinkedIn, I'm spending money on these job boards, maybe I've got access to this tool, but how do I make sure everyone in the team is using it? How do I make sure everyone, knows what it does? And also, when I look at a report of usage, what does that mean? These kind of questions are coming up. So I think, people are spending a bit more, but they want to make sure.
Can I just interject? Because that really connects well with David's point there. Because it could be that maybe there was a period where the vendors were winning a little bit, getting a budget, getting the items sold, but it was not being utilized. So now you've got this head of TA thinking, hey, I've just signed a $100,000 contract on this business here, and I'm not sure whether I'm getting my money's worth. I need someone to help me get my team up to speed on it, utilization, optimization stuff. Getting value for the money. Maybe there's those 2 points are actually connected. So super interesting. Okay, sorry, Kat, I interrupted you just to make that point. But you were about to say something else, I think.
I don't think so. If I was, I'd forgotten it.
Don't worry. Okay, let's have a look at where you think sourcing is going to go, you two. We've got about 10 minutes left for the end of the show, so I want to just put a bit of future focus to this. Leaving COVID-19 to one side and the different worldview, et cetera, but the general trend of where sourcing was heading, where do you see it as a function? Do you see it like bending back into and folding back into recruitment? Because I've seen a lot of sourcers start talking about, engagement is the new thing. We need to get better. As part of sourcing is actually engaging. It's not talk and stalk. Those two folks are together. You got to do the both together. And when I start seeing those types of conversations happening, I'm thinking, is sourcing a temporary separation of a function, and does it now fall back in? Now that sort of the finding of people is important, but actually you got to get them to talk to you. Where the realization of that is also important. Thoughts on that, David? Go to you.
I think actually it's not separated enough, because there's like actually three functions, as we've learned. There's research, there's marketing, and then there's direct engagement, right?
Right.
And honestly, the real question I think, is do recruiters have a future once we break it down further? Because once sourcing and marketing take over research and engagement, what's the recruiter doing? HR. So HR might as well just take that back. So, recruiters, we're coming for you. That's the future.
You're saying more specialization is required because the job is actually too big for one person to do. Like in one unit, you can't be skilled at all of these things. It's actually different jobs. We need to have focused researchers. Let's market map. Let's identify candidates. Let's figure those folks out. You have marketing to do the messaging. They're the experts at messaging. We shared the marketing how-tos. No recruiter could have wrote that. That was definitely, marketing expertise. And as you say, what does a recruiter do? The person trying to stitch it all together in the middle. But is that a coordinator? Is that what is that person? So very interesting. Okay. What are your thoughts on that, Katharine? Thoughts on David's point and also your own projections as the way you think sourcing is going to go in the future?
Yeah, I think I really see what David's saying. I've often thought that there are definitely sources with different flavors almost. Are you a networking sourcer? Are you the person who is just really embedded in a niche, and you go to the events, all the people, they know you're a bit like a node in the network, you're the glue, or are you the person who is just are you like an attraction person online? Are you just really hot at telling a story and sharing content and keeping a group engaged virtually? Or are you just all about the searching and what you need right now? And all those things could be called a sourcer, but
So I want to get the taxonomy right here because I'm inclined to agree with you. Instinctively, I would agree with you to say, hey, listen, it's all about can you find can you get the candidates in some way? It doesn't matter how you do it. And I think there's a bunch of people out there that go with that philosophy. But then there's other people that say, actually, that's all well and good. We're not criticizing people who can do that. But is it really the activity of sourcing as we describe it as a searcher, as an online researcher for candidates? Because it might be different skills and different things. So taxonomically, that's a very interesting debate. I wonder where you fall on that, David. I mean, do you subscribe to the idea it's a broad description? It's generally about candidate acquisition, or is it a narrow description? It's about, doing the internet research and finding what Glenn Cathy might call human capital data or something like that, I think.
Yeah, I think if we want to talk about sourcing specifically, like what it works best as distinct from other roles, it was absolutely a research-oriented function. Like online or off, though, it's easier to do research online than off, right? Hard to get to libraries these days. It's absolutely a research function. And you can call a lot of things sourcing, and I think that's actually where sourcing fails, is in that taxonomical disconnect, because people say one thing and mean another, because they lack good language to actually describe what they're looking for. And I think that's something that's ongoing. That's what I said, like the split. I think that split absolutely exists. And I think right now a lot of things are called sourcing that are different things, but I think we need new names for some of those things that aren't research oriented, that do focus on, working your network. Though I think a lot of people in the recruiting space might say, hey, that's recruiting, guys. Why are you trying to take our thing? And then the marketing engagement online thing, like the social media engagement experts, for example, like that's, by the way, an amazing skill, and some of it's luck and timing, but some of it really is something you can build up over time.
Yeah.
But it's not like a research function. It is absolutely a media personality function. Yeah, and it's a different skill set once again.
Yeah, I think where we've got to here is
influencers.
There's many different ways to skin the cat. We all knew this anyway as recruiters, right? Because if you remember back in sort of the agency days, so to speak, where you're surrounded by recruiters, the best people didn't necessarily do the same things. They often did totally different things, but they were still top billing for different reasons. And I think that still carries over in our sort of world now, where, you do get people who, and by the way, just to support Kat's initial point there, it is a little bit of, people can say, hey, it's all semantics, it doesn't make a difference. So I get that as well. But for the purposes of this conversation, it might be useful just to be a little bit more precision focused on it, to say, okay, here is the label for this type of function and this type of activity. what is the future for this type of activity compared to other stuff, because it might help people actually focus their time. Because, hey, if it is the case, Georgina's right, you're wrong, David, sourcing is going to go down in terms of demand, then, hey, you better know what sourcing is, because you better get doing the influencing, or better get doing the marketing, or whatever it might be. So it can be helpful to be a bit more precise. Anyway, listen, let me leave you with a final question for you, for the audience, before we have to close the show down. What are your final kind of recommendations for a young person trying to, it doesn't have to be a young person, but a sourcer's trying to upskill, aside from both of your training courses, which, by the way, I'm going to share to everyone in the messaging. So don't worry about that. But where else would they go in order to just upskill themselves and think, okay, this is how you get better at this job going forward? So, Katharine, go with you on this first.
I just think, all the information is probably out there. If you're that sourcing mindset kind of person, you're probably going to be quite good at tracking down the answer to your question. So if you wonder, is it possible? Google it. My best advice is Google the shit out of everything.
That's it. So, hey, listen, it's a good test of your sourcing knowledge. If you don't know how to get better at sourcing, then maybe sourcing has never been in your DNA. So that's kind of right, to a certain degree.
Sourcing.
Yeah. Cool.
And if all else fails, ask someone.
Yeah, always ask. Makes apps. The sourcing community is some of the most friendly people, I would say, that I've encountered in the industry. Very sharing. I mean, obviously different personalities and all the rest of it, but I've seen some great kind of community building over there. How about you, David? Where would you say is a good place for people to go hang out and do all that type of stuff if they want to get better at sourcing?
Do it is the thing. I guess I don't know what you're asking, and so I'm gonna fumble this question, but like,
don't worry, man.
if you're gonna, I mean, like, it seems like right now the mind share is primarily centered. If you want one place to go to like find resources and stuff, I would broadly say Facebook, because I think that's where all the community traction is in our sector right now. And there's dozens, and you've got them all on your website, and some I haven't heard of. So there's a lot out there. But like, connect, network, figure out what you actually want to get better at. Don't just think like, I need to get better at this broadly. Like, look into it and figure out what it is like you're trying to get better at. What's the problem you're actually trying to solve? And then connect with whoever can best address that specific problem. And just try to pick one. Like, you can't do 10 things at once. So pick one thing that you think is the solution to the problem, or pick one problem that you have and go find somebody who's willing to help you solve it and seems to know what they're talking about. And Facebook's a great way to do that right now. So
amazing.
Like,
I would endorse that. It seems that the community stuff is happening on Facebook. Slack is really tough to move. I think there's a few great Slack channels out there. DBR, great community, but very few others I think are very active. But everyone is on Facebook generally still. So check out the communities there and go ahead and join it. I've just shared in the chat stream, by the way, the big list of online recruiter communities, in which there's going to be tons of people that are focused on sourcing. That's geographically labeled as well. So if you have location specific stuff, go and join those and check it out. Oh, by the way, on TikTok, we're going to be talking and doing a show on TikTok in short order. So folks need to make sure that you're available for that. That's about it for us. Thank you very much for your time, everybody. Katharine Robinson, thank you so much for joining us.
I love TikTok.
Great to have you there. David, great to have you join the show. Brilliant to see you again. Everybody, always. We will be back next week. Thank you so much for your time. By the way, we'll be back. We mentioned him earlier today. It's an audience with Glenn Cathy next week. So we're going to be doing a one-to-one with him. He is one of the big heroes in the industry, certainly one of the big popularizers of the idea of sourcing. So someone I think you should definitely pay attention to. So I'll leave it there. Everybody have a good weekend. Have a good week. Stay safe, obviously, post-lockdown. Be smart. And we'll catch you next week.
Take care. Thanks.
Bye-bye.